Welcome back to the channel. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to be tackling some pretty mind-bending ideas from Stephen Davis's Holographic Universe Workshop.
Oh, yeah, his work is fascinating.
It really is. And if you're interested in checking it out yourself, we'll have a link down in the description. This is actually part 4 of our 5-part series exploring this workshop.
Wow, part 4 already.
I know, right? Time flies when you're having fun with quantum physics. But seriously, we've been diving into how these quantum physics ideas, experiments, and all that might be changing how we see, well, everything. Reality, spirituality, all the big questions.
Definitely some big questions there.
For sure. And I don't know about you, but I'm always looking for ways to, feel more in control of my life and understand, where I fit in the grand scheme of things. And this deep dive, I think, offers a pretty unique perspective on all that.
I think a lot of people feel that way, trying to make sense of it all.
Totally. So the last 3 parts, we explored some of the foundational concepts, like the idea of the field and how our brains might actually be working more like holographic receivers.
Right, translating that information from the field into what we perceive as, well, reality.
Yeah, it's a pretty big paradigm shift, right? Yeah. Makes you question everything you thought you knew.
For sure. It challenges our everyday experience of the world.
Okay, so in part 4, Davis introduces this idea of the finite eye.
Oh, yeah, the finite eye.
It's basically like our limited selves, trapped, so to speak, in this holographic universe. And he contrasts that with this idea of the infinite eye, which is like a much larger, more expanded consciousness.
Right, the bigger picture, the part of us that's connected to everything.
Exactly. And to illustrate all of this, he uses a super relatable analogy. Video games.
Video games, huh? I like where this is going.
So, you know how in video games you create your character? You choose their gender, what they look like, their name.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like creating a whole persona from scratch. You spend hours customizing every little detail.
I know. And Davis's point is, maybe that's what our infinite eye does with us as players in this, grand game of life. We get to design our appearance, pick our name, at least symbolically speaking.
It's a fascinating way to think about it. We're like characters in this giant cosmic video game, and our infinite eye is the one who designed us.
It raises a pretty big question. Does every player have their own individual infinite eye, or is there one for everyone?
That's a good question. It's like, is there a separate God for each of us, or is there one grand consciousness that we all tap into?
Right. So Davis explores both sides of that. On the one hand, you have the idea of a single infinite eye, which is kind of like the traditional idea of God.
Yeah, that there's this one ultimate source of creation.
And on the other hand, you have the idea of a separate infinite eye for every single player.
Wow, that would be a lot of infinite eyes. The universe would be pretty crowded.
Right. And to make things even more interesting, he presents this middle ground possibility. What if one infinite eye could have multiple players? Maybe even across different timelines or universes.
Okay, so it's not just one or the other. There could be some kind of blend.
Exactly. It's like our infinite eye might be playing on multiple levels, experiencing all these different possibilities through different versions of us.
That's wild. It reminds me of parallel universes, the idea that every decision we make creates a split, and there's a whole other universe where we made the opposite choice.
Totally. It's like in one universe I'm turning left, and in another I'm turning right. And both of those possibilities are happening at the same time.
So our infinite eye gets to experience all those possibilities through all those different versions of us.
Exactly. And Davis even goes so far as to suggest that this might explain past lives.
Past lives, you mean like reincarnation?
Yeah, but instead of them being past lives, what if they're actually happening right now in different universes?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So they're not past lives, but more like parallel lives happening simultaneously with our current lives.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And those lives could be linked to our infinite eyes somehow. Like we're all sharing a connection to the same source.
That's mind-blowing.
It really is. So we've got all these players, we've got infinite eyes, maybe spread across different universes, but it begs the question, why? What's the point of all this? Why create players in the first place?
It's the ultimate question, isn't it? What's the meaning of life? The purpose of it all?
Right. And I think deep down we all want to know the answer to that. We want to feel like our lives have meaning, that we're not just random accidents.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty universal desire. We want to believe there's a reason for our existence.
Absolutely. So what does Davis say about this? What's his take on the whole purpose of life thing?
Well, he proposes that maybe it's as simple and profound as the joy of creation. Like, think of an artist who creates a painting or a sculpture. There's no real reason for it other than the pure pleasure of creating something beautiful.
Okay, so it's like art for art's sake.
Exactly. And in this view, the human game is like the infinite eye's masterpiece. It's a giant, intricate work of art full of beauty, complexity, and endless possibilities.
And we're the players in that work of art.
Right. And maybe the whole point is just to experience it, to enjoy the ride.
That actually makes a lot of sense to me. I've always struggled with the idea of a singular grand purpose in life. It feels like so much pressure. Maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's about embracing the journey, the ups and downs, the thrills and chills, just like a roller coaster.
I think a lot of people feel that way, that pressure to find your purpose.
Right. And remember that Bill Hicks analogy we talked
Yeah.
about life being like an amusement park ride.
Oh, yeah. Life is just an amusement park ride. That's a good one.
The people who realize it's just a ride, he said, often get silenced because everyone else is so invested in believing it's something more, something serious and heavy.
It's funny, but there's a lot of truth to that, I think.
For sure. And it really makes you think about how you approach life. Are you clinging to the illusion that it's all serious and meaningful, or are you allowing yourself to just enjoy the ride?
I like that. Enjoy the ride.
It's about letting go of the need to control everything and just surrendering to the experience.
Sounds pretty liberating, actually.
It is. It's like taking a deep breath and finally relaxing into the present moment.
I'm feeling more relaxed already. So where do we go from here? If we're just supposed to enjoy the ride, what does that actually look like in practice?
That's a great question, and it's something Davis explores in depth in the next part of the workshop. He introduces this idea that the human game is actually a two-part experience.
A two-part experience. Intriguing. Tell me more.
Well, he says that in the first part, we're all about exploring limitations. It's like that initial climb up the roller coaster hill, where we're forgetting who we really are as players and getting caught up in the illusion of this holographic world.
Oh, I see. So that's where all those rules come in that we were talking about earlier, like believing the holographic world is the only reality, feeling responsible for fixing everything, and judging everything as good or bad.
Exactly. Those are all part of the first part of the human game. They create this sense of separation and make us believe that we're limited, powerless beings in this big, scary world.
And that's why we experience so much suffering, right? Because we're constantly battling against ourselves and those perceived limitations.
Right. And Davis says that this struggle actually serves a purpose. It's like that initial climb up the roller coaster hill. You need that climb to gain momentum for the thrilling drop that comes after. It's all part of the design.
Okay, I like that analogy. So the first part of the human game is like setting the stage for something bigger, something more exciting.
Exactly. And in the second part of the game, that's where things start to shift. The player starts to wake up to the holographic nature of reality and reclaims their power, their connection to the infinite eye.
That's where the real fun begins, huh?
You got it. It's like the scales fall from our eyes.
Yeah.
And we finally see the world for what it truly is, a grand, playful illusion designed to help us learn and grow.
I can't wait to dive into that.
Me too. But first, we need to understand the rules of the first part of the game, the limitations that we're all playing under. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, you've got me hooked. Let's get into those limitations and see how we can start breaking free from them.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
So let's dive into those limitations, the rules of the first part of the human game, as Davis calls it. What are some of the key things that keep us feeling stuck and powerless?
Well, he actually outlines several rules that we tend to buy into in this first part of the game. And they're pretty eye-opening, I gotta say.
Oh, I bet. Like, what kind of rules are we talking about here?
One of the biggest ones is this belief that the holographic world is the only reality. We look around us, we see all this solidity, all these seemingly separate objects and people, and we think that's all there is.
Right. It's like we get so caught up in the physical world that we forget about the bigger picture, the underlying reality of the field and the infinite eye.
Exactly. And when we do that, when we forget that this holographic world is just a temporary projection, we start to give our power away. We start believing that external circumstances have control over us.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's like we become victims of our circumstances instead of recognizing that we have the power to choose how we experience them.
Right. And that leads to another big rule of the first part of the game, judging everything as good or bad. We're constantly evaluating our experiences, labeling them as positive or negative, desirable or undesirable.
We're all guilty of that. It's
Yeah.
like our minds are wired to categorize everything.
And that judgment creates a lot of suffering, Davis says, Because when we judge something as bad, we resist it, we push it away, and that resistance creates tension, stress, and unhappiness.
It's like we're constantly fighting against reality instead of accepting it for what it is.
Exactly. And another rule that goes hand in hand with judgment is this feeling of responsibility for fixing everything. We see problems in the world, injustices, suffering, and we feel like it's our duty to fix it all.
Oh, I relate to that one big time. It's like that superhero complex. I gotta save the world.
Right. But Davis says that this feeling of responsibility can actually be really disempowering. Because when we believe that we're responsible for fixing everything, we set ourselves up for failure.
Because we can't possibly fix everything. It's too much for any one person to handle.
Exactly. And it creates this constant sense of pressure and inadequacy, like we're not doing enough or not good enough.
So, if these are the rules of the first part of the game, what about the second part? How do we start shifting gears and playing by a different set of rules?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Davis describes the second part of the game as a process of waking up, of recognizing the holographic nature of reality and reclaiming our power as co-creators.
Oh, I love that. Reclaiming our power. So it's not about trying to change the external world, but about changing our internal experience, our perception of reality.
Exactly. It's a shift from seeing ourselves as victims of circumstance to realizing that we're actually powerful creators, shaping our experience through our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs.
Okay, so how do we actually make that shift? What are some of the key principles of the second part of the game?
One of the most important ones is shifting our focus from thinking to feeling. In the first part of the game, we tend to get stuck in our heads, overanalyzing everything, trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It's like my mind is constantly racing, trying to predict what's going to happen next, control the outcome, make sure everything goes according to plan.
But in the second part of the game, we realize that the answers aren't found in our heads, but in our hearts. It's about connecting with our intuition, our gut feelings, and allowing ourselves to be guided by those feelings, not just our thoughts.
So, like trusting that inner voice, that inner knowing, instead of second guessing ourselves all the time.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that deeper wisdom that resides within us, that connection to the infinite I. And along with that comes a shift from judgment to acceptance. The first part of the game, we're constantly evaluating everything, labeling it as good or bad, right or wrong.
We're always comparing ourselves to others, trying to measure up, feeling like we're not enough. It's exhausting.
It is. But in the second part of the game, we realize that all of that judgment is just an illusion. It's a way of keeping ourselves separate, disconnected from the flow of life.
So, how do we break free from that judgment? How do we start accepting things as they are?
It's about recognizing that every experience is a gift, a chance for growth and learning. It's about seeing the perfection in the imperfection, the beauty in the chaos.
It's like finding the silver lining in every cloud.
And that brings us to another key principle of the second part of the game: trust. Trust in our infinite I, trust in the process of life, trust in our own inner wisdom.
Trust. That's a big one. It's easy to say, but much harder to actually do, especially when we've been conditioned to distrust ourselves and the world around us.
It is a challenge. But Davis says that cultivating trust is essential for moving into the second part of the game. It's about letting go of the need to control everything and surrendering to the flow, knowing that we're always being guided and supported, even when things feel chaotic or uncertain.
It's like having faith that everything is happening for a reason, even if we don't understand it in the moment.
Exactly. And that faith, that trust, allows us to relax into the present moment and appreciate the beauty of the unfolding journey, even when it's messy or unpredictable. And this ties into another really important aspect of the second part of the game: personal responsibility.
Okay, personal responsibility. What does that look like in the context of the human game?
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose how we respond to the experiences our infinite I creates for us. It's not about blame or guilt, but about understanding that we're not just passive victims of circumstance, but active participants in the creation of our reality.
So it's like even though our infinite I might be setting the stage, we still have a say in how the play unfolds.
Exactly. We get to choose our role, our attitude, our actions. We can react and get caught up in the drama, or we can respond with awareness, intention, and even humor.
It's about taking ownership of our experience, realizing that we're not just puppets on strings, but powerful creators.
That's a great way to put it. And it's that shift in perspective that's so essential for moving from the first part of the human game to the second. It's about recognizing that we're not stuck in some limited, predetermined reality, but that we have the power to shape our experience and choose a new way of being.
It's exciting, actually. Like, if we really grasp this, it means we have so much more potential than we realize.
Exactly. It's like we're graduating from playing the game on easy mode to choosing the highest difficulty setting because we know we can handle the challenge.
I like that analogy. So, how do we know when we're starting to make that shift? What are some signs that we're moving into the second part of the game?
That's a great question. And it's something Davis explores in detail. One of the biggest signs, he says, is a feeling of lightness. Like a sense of freedom and joy that wasn't there before.
Okay, I can definitely relate to that. Like, when you finally let go of that need to control everything and just surrender to the flow.
Exactly. It's like a weight has been lifted off your shoulders,
Yeah.
and you can finally breathe deeply and relax into the present moment.
And that relaxation, that feeling of peace, is a sign that you're starting to align with the energy of your infinite eye.
Yeah, it's like you're finally in sync with the universe instead of fighting against it.
And another sign, Davis says, is that you start to see the world differently. Like, you start to notice the beauty in everyday things, the interconnectedness of everything.
Oh, totally. It's like those aha moments where you suddenly see the bigger picture, the hidden patterns and connections that were always there, but you just couldn't see them before.
Right. And those moments of insight, those glimpses of a deeper reality, become more and more frequent as you move into the second part of the game.
It's like you're tuning into a different frequency, a higher level of consciousness.
And your intuition becomes stronger too. You start
Uh,
to trust your gut feelings more, even when they don't make logical sense.
Because you're realizing that your intuition is actually a direct line to your infinite eye, to that higher wisdom that knows what's best for you.
And as you start trusting your intuition, you also start trusting the process of life. You realize that even when things are challenging, even when things don't go according to plan, there's a bigger picture at play.
It's like you're learning to surrender to the flow, knowing that even the detours and roadblocks are ultimately leading you to where you need to be.
It takes a lot of faith, though, right? To trust that everything is happening for a reason, even when it feels like everything is falling apart.
It does. But that faith, that trust, is what allows us to move through those challenges with grace and resilience. It's knowing that we're not alone, that we're always being guided and supported by our infinite eye, even when we can't see it.
So if we're starting to experience those shifts, that lightness, that expanded awareness, that trust, does that mean we've fully transitioned to the second part of the game?
Well, Davis says it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing. It's more like a gradual awakening,
Yeah.
a process of peeling back the layers of illusion and stepping into our true power as co-creators.
So it's not like we flip a switch and suddenly we're playing by all the rules of the second part.
Right. It's more like a dance, a back and forth between the two parts of the game. We might have moments where we're fully in that flow, that trust, that joy. And we might have other moments where we fall back into old patterns of thinking and behaving.
So it's like we're constantly recalibrating, fine-tuning our approach to the game.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the more we cultivate those qualities of awareness, acceptance, and trust, the easier it becomes to stay in that flow, to play the game from a place of power and joy.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It's given me a whole new perspective on how to approach life and how to navigate the challenges that inevitably come up.
Me too. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we have so much more power than we realize. We're not just passive victims of circumstance, but active participants in the creation of our reality.
Right. We're co-creating our experience with our infinite eye, and the more we understand that, the more freedom and joy we can experience in our lives.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to see how Davis applies these principles to the topic of money in part 5 of his workshop. That's always been a tricky area for me, but I have a feeling he's going to offer some really insightful perspectives.
Me too. I'm really curious to see how this whole holographic model can help us create more abundance and prosperity in our lives.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dives, but be sure to join us next time as we explore part 5 of Stephen Davis's Holographic Universe workshop. We'll be diving into the fascinating topic of money and abundance, and I can't wait to share what we learn with you.
It's going to be amazing. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone.
And in the meantime, remember, if life truly is a holographic game created by your infinite eye, what possibilities open up for you? What kind of game do you choose to play? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Until next time.